My girlfriend sold my rare comic collection without my permission to pay off her debts, so I decided to call the police and have her arrested. Duh. My name is James, and I've always been a comic book collector. Since I was a kid, comics have been my escape, my passion, and my most treasured possession. While others might have amassed sports memorabilia or vintage cars, I had my collection of rare comics. I'd scoured conventions, auctions, and online marketplaces for years, hunting down those elusive issues. Some worth hundreds, some worth thousands. To anyone who didn't get it, they were just funny books. But to me, they were something much deeper. Family heirlooms, snapshots of history, and a record of who I was. Over the years, I had built up a collection that was not just valuable in terms of money, but in sentiment. There were issues that my father had passed down to me, comics we read together when I was younger. There were others that I'd spent weeks hunting down, traveling to conventions across the country, and making friends with sellers who gave me tips on where to find the rarest of the rare. To me, each comic represented a moment in time, a story of struggle, perseverance, and joy. They were worth far more than just their price tags. They were my life's work. Amelia had been my girlfriend for about 3 years when I first met her. She was beautiful, funny, and we had a lot in common. At least that's what I thought. She didn't share my love for comics, but that wasn't a deal breaker. She had her own interests, and I respected that. In fact, I had a lot of respect for her. She was driven, intelligent, and ambitious. She was someone who had her own career goals, her own life outside of me. I admired that about her. But over time, I started to see a different side of her, a side that grew more dismissive of my hobbies and eventually of me. It all started innocently enough. She moved into my apartment after her landlord sold the place she was renting. I had a spare room, and I offered to let her stay with me. We had been dating long enough that it felt like a natural step, and I was happy to have her around. But soon little things began to change. She started rearranging my apartment without asking. My comic collection was moved from its dedicated space on the shelves to the back of the closet. At first, I brushed it off as her being helpful, but then I started noticing that she was making comments about my comics. "Don't you think it's a little childish?" she would say. "You're an adult now. You should be focusing on more mature things." I tried to ignore it. I understood that not everyone was going to appreciate my collection the way I did. But the more she talked about it, the more I began to feel like she didn't respect something that was so important to me. It wasn't just a collection, it was a part of who I was, and I began to realize that Amelia wasn't respecting that. I remember the day I bought the comic I had been searching for years, an early issue of Fantastic Four, one of the first Marvel comics ever printed. It wasn't just any comic, it was the comic. The issue I had been hunting for, the one that I had missed out on multiple times at auctions and conventions. I finally found it at a dealer's booth at a local comic show, and I managed to get a good deal on it. I was over the moon. It was more than just a purchase. It was a victory. When I got home that night, I showed it to Amelia. "Look what I got," I said, excitement in my voice. But instead of sharing in my joy, she just gave me a look. "Really, James? Another comic?" she sighed. "We have bills to pay, you know." Her words stung, but I tried to shake it off. I wanted to tell her that this was important to me, that it wasn't just about spending money. It was about preserving something that meant so much. But she didn't understand. And in that moment, I began to wonder if she ever would. As time went on, things only got worse. Amelia's attitude toward my collection became more and more dismissive. She would constantly move my comics around, making sarcastic comments about how they were just clutter. She didn't see the value in them, and worse, she started to make fun of me for caring so much. "You really need to grow up," she would say. "Spending all your time on this collection is a waste. There's a world out there, you know." It was as though my passion was a joke to her. And what hurt even more was that I felt like I was losing a part of myself in the process. She was the one person who should have understood, but she didn't. Then, the situation took an even darker turn. Amelia started borrowing my things without asking. At first, it was small stuff, a tablet, a camera, a few tools I kept in the closet, but then it escalated. One night, I came home to find that my dad's old leather jacket was missing. I had kept it safe for years. It was a family heirloom passed down from my father. When I asked Amelia about it, she simply said, "Oh, I gave it to my brother. He needed it." My heart dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why didn't you ask me first?" I demanded. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she shrugged. That was the moment I began to realize that something was seriously wrong. She wasn't just disregarding my things, she was disregarding me. And then the worst thing happened. One evening, I came home to find that my comic collection, every single one of my rarest issues, was gone. The shelves where they had been neatly arranged were empty. I called Amelia, frantic, and when she picked up the phone, I asked her where my comics were. "I moved them to the car," she said casually. "I thought they'd be safer there." But when I went to her car to check, I found that it was empty. Something wasn't right. My mind raced as I began to call pawn shops and comic stores, hoping to find out where my comics had gone. After a few calls, one of the owners recognized Amelia's description. She had sold my comics, just a few days earlier. I could hardly breathe. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed to the pawn shop. There, sitting on the shelves, were some of my most valuable comics, comics that could never be replaced. When I confronted the shop owner, he told me that Amelia had sold them for a fraction of what they were worth. I walked back to the apartment in a daze, my hands shaking. I knew I had to confront her. I had to understand why she did this. But when I did, her response shattered me. "I needed the money," she said. "You wouldn't help me pay off my credit card debt, so I sold your comics to take care of it." It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal? I echoed, my voice rising with anger. "Those were my comics. You didn't even ask. You just took them." But she didn't care. She didn't apologize. Instead, she tried to justify it, saying that I was overreacting. "I'll pay you back," she said, brushing me off. "You'll get the money back. It's not like I sold everything." But that wasn't enough. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the complete disregard for something that had been so important to me. That night, I called the police. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. I explained the situation, provided proof of ownership, and told them about the pawn shop where the comics had been sold. When the police arrived, Amelia tried to play it off as though it was no big deal. "It's just comics," she said, almost laughing. "He's overreacting." But the officers didn't find it funny. They explained that what she did was theft, regardless of our relationship, and they took her away in handcuffs. The shock of it all hit me in waves. I stood in the apartment, feeling numb. I had never imagined that it would come to this, calling the police on the woman I had loved. But in that moment, I realized that I had no choice. What she had done was unforgivable. Amelia was eventually charged with theft. The court process was long, but I was determined to see it through. I didn't want revenge, but I needed to hold her accountable for what she had done. The truth was, it wasn't just about the comics. It was about the respect and trust that she had shattered. She had taken something that mattered deeply to me and treated it like trash, and I couldn't let that go. In the end, I was able to recover some of my comics, though many were lost forever. The damage to our relationship, however, was irreversible. Amelia and I parted ways, and though it was painful, I knew it was the right thing to do. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever truly get over what happened. It's not just about the comics, it's about what they represented, memories of my childhood, my father, and everything that made me who I am. But what I've learned through all of this is that the things we care about are worth fighting for, and sometimes we have to make the hard choices, even when it means saying goodbye to the people we thought we could trust. Now, I keep my comics safe, both the ones on the shelves and the ones in my heart. And I've learned to trust my instincts because sometimes people show us who they really are, and we have to listen. And that, to me, is more valuable than any comic book.